بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل واجعلنا من خيرة أمة سيدنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Okay, we're going to continue this week with lesson 2. So, last week we discussed in some detail the idea of ecological rights, the rights of the environment, and the importance of that in the life of a believer, as well as the basis of human rights. So how unique it is that our religion has for 1400 years posited or affirmed the rights of that all human beings are entitled to certain rights. We've looked briefly, not in much detail, at how some of the rights afforded to all humans in Islam map onto very modern ideas about this, like the UN Declaration of Universal Human Rights and so forth. What we're going to do now is take a look at what are the rights that our religion affords to all humans. And remember that we're studying this not as an exercise in sort of socio-political thought or anything like that. We're studying this so as to implement it. Okay? We're studying it so as to bring it into our lives and ensure that, as the Prophet ﷺ says, آتِ كُلَّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقًّا. Give everyone who is entitled a right their right. Okay? The reason we spent a bit of time on the background of this and putting it in perspective last week is that a lot of these things we sort of take for granted now, but we only take it for granted because we happen to live in the early 21st century. We happen to live within 100 years of World War II. Okay? Had we lived at virtually any other point in human history, this would have been a very, very strange idea. The idea that every human being, by virtue of being human, is entitled to certain rights. Okay? But we'll take a look now at what the specific rights are. Right. So, here are the basic rights that we're talking about here. Not to be troubled or harmed either in wealth or in person, without a valid Shari'i reason. To be protected from the evil of people's tongues, the right to physical assistance, the right to not suffer cruel and unusual punishments, or be threatened in such a way, and the right to da'wah, the right to be called to God. Okay? So, what are we talking about here? These are pretty straightforward, and I doubt very much that any of us actually transgress over these things. Well, most of them anyway. The first is the right not to be troubled, not to be harmed. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ said, if you cannot do good, at least do no harm. Don't be an active force that harms others. Either, it says here, in their person or in their wealth. That is to say, a person's life and health and so forth, they are what's called inviolable, which means they can't be touched without or they can't be taken away without a valid reason to do so. For example, if a person has stolen something from someone, then that thing obviously can be taken back again, right? But other than exceptions, other than criminal things like that, non-Muslims are not to be harmed, neither in their person nor in their wealth. Now, there's a bullet point here, which, I mean, it's actually quite difficult to read even on your notes, looking at it. It's quite small. But only the state has coercive power over others, which means no one can legally force another person to do anything. Okay? There's a basic principle in our religion, لا إكراه في الدين. There is no compulsion in religion. Now this means a number of things. Number one, it is that the most obvious reason, the most obvious thing here is do not forcibly convert people. Okay? Now, in many societies in human history, forcible conversion or choosing people's religion for them has been the default. Okay, that's been the default. All right, the Native American Indians, but more actually the Incas, the Aztecs, and so forth, the peoples of Central America, were forcibly converted to Catholicism, forcibly converted at the point of a sword. Muslims and Jews in Spain during what's called the Reconquista, the conquest of Spain by the Christians after 800 years of Muslim rule. The people, non-Christians, that's Muslims and Jews, as well as non-Catholics, so Protestants, Orthodox Christians and so forth, were forcibly converted to Christianity. Okay? In other societies, this has been a very similar thing. So, this is something that we are not permitted to do. That's the first understanding of La ikraha fi din. Do not convert other people forcibly. Why? قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. Because true guidance has been made clearly distinct from falsehood. That is to say, because it's obvious what's right. Right? You shouldn't need to convert people because it is obvious. The right is obvious. Right? The truth is obvious. The second meaning of La ikraha fi din is actually a psychological statement. You cannot coerce people in terms of what they believe. You cannot externally force somebody to hold an internal view. You can force somebody to pretend to believe. You can force someone to go through the motions of believing, but you can't force them to actually believe. And one of the things that we learn from this particular understanding of the statement, La ikraha fi din, is that what we are after, we as believers are after, is people really believing, genuinely believing, not pretending to believe. The idea is not here to get people to fit into a, to fit into a cookie cutter template of what you want them to be, but rather that they change from within, that they realize truth, they realize where guidance lies, and they change from within. Okay? The third meaning of La ikraha fi din is that in the religion of Islam, you cannot force people to do things. Okay? You can't force people to do things. The only authority that has the power to force people to do things is the state. Alright? Is the state. So, as an example, when I was teaching some of this stuff in Birmingham, I remember there was a particular situation that came up about, there was a guy who was, treating a sister quite badly, husband and wife, he was treating his sister quite badly, abusing her and so forth. And she had come to me and also to the other people that Maulana Sajjad was teaching as well. And she had said, look, what do I do? I'm being abused, what do I do? And I said, go to the police. I said, go to the police. Some of the other guys said, Doc, don't involve the police. I said, why? He said, that's not how we do things around here. So what do we do? He says, well, send some boys around. We'll send some boys around. Yeah? Don't worry, he'll treat her fine after that. Right? So, what is this? Right? Heart's in the right place. I get it, heart's in the right place, yeah? Yeah, I remember once somebody was, PTS had gone, I think it was either to Burton or Derby or something that was being taught there. Somebody obviously wasn't very happy with it, and so they spread a rumour that PTS was a government initiative, a sort of government, like part of Prevent. It was a government initiative to get Muslims to think particularly. It isn't. This person was, and so there was a bit of a conversation about, so what do we do about this? And, I said, oh, let's sit the guy down, let's talk to him. One of the guys who was there, he was an admin. No, none of you will know him, so I can. One of the guys said, look. He said, what's his phone number? He says, oh, there's his phone number. He said, right, give me the phone. Phones him. He said, Salaam alaikum. This is ... I'm part of Path of Salvation. My cousin is so and so. Salaam alaikum. And he said, Doc, you'll have no trouble any further. That's sorted. And apparently, this cousin of his is a notorious gangster in this town. And this guy got so scared when he heard that this, because he understood immediately the threat. He got so scared by this that he stopped all that rumours when he kind of came and apologised and what have you. I thought this was very amusing, but at the same level, at the same time, it is something that is deeply problematic. This is vigilante justice. Ultimately, this is vigilante justice, and it can work both ways. So I remember equally getting a phone call from a student of mine at 1 in the morning. I do not encourage you to phone me at 1 in the morning. I got a student from this, 1 in the morning, the phone rings, and I answered, oh, what happened? And he says, oh, Doc, he said, he was getting married the next day. He says, and I knew this, and because we had helped sort of arrange the whole thing, and obviously there were some people who weren't very happy with the marriage. It was, again, across castes, so someone was, he was a Chowdhury and she was a, I don't know what, I don't know, whatever. So, I get this phone call. This guy says, what happened? He says, I've just got a phone call now from this guy who is a notorious gangster in Birmingham. And he phoned me up and he said, look, nothing personal. Nothing personal. But if you marry this girl tomorrow, I will mail you pieces of your parents. I will mail you pieces of your parents every week. And I said, come on. He said, and his voice, the way he said what he said, just sent a shiver down my spine. He said, Doc, I know who this guy is. He's not joking. He's not joking. What do I do? I said, don't get married tomorrow. Don't get married tomorrow. You have to call it off. Yeah? And then we'll see what to do. They did get married eventually. If someone has stolen something from you, you can't force them to give it back to you. Okay? You can inform the authorities and let the authorities do their job. Alright? So, this is something that is critical in our religion. Right? It's very important to understand. Okay? We don't use physical force even in order to bring about the right when you have a situation where there is a government and that government has an authority to do this. Okay? Because that is the only authority. So the police, the government, the police, people like that. And we need to utilize these because this is the setup that has been put in place. Anything else very quickly becomes the government of the strong. It becomes a mob rule. And that leads to enormous problems in society. Alright? Our religion, historically Sunni Islam especially, has placed a premium on societal law and order. Okay? That what's important is that there should be law and order. Even if there is some unfairness in that, there should be law and order. Why? Because our primary purpose on this earth is not to establish the kingdom of God on earth. That's not our primary purpose. It's not to establish justice on the earth. Our primary purpose is to worship our Lord. Secondarily, we should be establishing justice on the earth, but not primarily. And what can happen is in circumstances where there is political turmoil or there is social unrest, all right? When people are unsure as to whether their land is going to be protected, their wealth is going to be protected, whether they will be safe, and if in those circumstances it becomes very difficult to focus on Allah, to focus on God. All right? So this right extends, not to be harmed or not to be troubled or harmed in personal wealth, extends to all human beings. Why? Because all human beings deserve the opportunity to come to know God. And in order to have that opportunity, they need to be in possession of life and health. They need to be in possession of their wealth and their property. If they're worried about those things, they will never be able to even try to find God. Okay? To be protected from the evil of people's tongues. That is to say, do not talk badly about non-Muslims, either in front of them or behind their back. This, of course, applies to Muslims as well, but sometimes Muslims think that not gossiping applies only to Muslims. This is not the case. It applies to everyone, and gossiping means talking badly about people. Prophet so for instance, and a great example of this in the seerah is Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. So this is at the conquest of Mecca, right at the end of the seerah, after Mecca has been conquered. Now, after Mecca was conquered, there still remained disbelievers, polytheists in Mecca. Right? They weren't put to death, they weren't driven out or anything like that. They remained in Mecca. All right? And one of them was the son of Abu Jahl. Okay, now Abu Jahl is one of the major persecutors of the believers in the Meccan period. He had fought against the Muslims until literally his dying breath. Okay, he died at the Battle of Badr. Right? And he fought against the Muslims and he persecuted the Muslims literally until his dying breath. Okay? Now, Ikrimah continued the fight against the Muslims. He continued to fight against the Muslims. And he continued to fight against the Muslims right up until the conquest of Mecca. During the conquest of Mecca, when there was, the Muslims were coming in, and you've heard it was bloodless, there wasn't a battle, the Muslims just rode in, but there was one skirmish, and that happened when one of the columns of the Muslim army coming into Mecca was set upon by a band of soldiers led by Ikrimah. Right? And they were very quickly subdued. And the Prophet ﷺ had told all the Muslims, no swords are to be drawn. And as he is coming into Mecca, he can see the flash of steel coming from another. He can see the flash of steel. And he sends them to go and investigate. What's going on? I said no violence. I said no violence. And they came, the commander of that column came to the Prophet and he said, Ya Rasulullah, this is what happened. We captured Ikrimah, but he attacked us and so on. Now all of Mecca, virtually, after the Meccans saw the strength of the Muslims, but also they experienced the mercy and forgiveness of the Prophet ﷺ. They witnessed the toppling of their idols, they witnessed the believers praying, and the restoration of the Kaaba to its primordial purpose, which is the worship of one God. Okay? إِنَّ أَوَّلَ بَيْتٍ وُضِيَ لِلنَّاسِ إِلَّا الَّذِي بِبَكَّةَ. The first place of worship for mankind was in the valley of Mecca. Alright? When they witnessed that, the vast majority of them accepted Islam and remained faithful in their Islam till the end of their lives. However, a few didn't, and one of those was Ikrimah. And I won't tell you the whole story, but eventually he came to the Prophet ﷺ. Remember, this is after having broken the ceasefire of the conquest of Mecca, and so when he comes to the Prophet ﷺ, the son, the enemy of the Prophet ﷺ, and the son of the great enemy of the Prophet ﷺ. He comes, and the Prophet ﷺ says, "Has not the time yet come for you to believe, Ikrimah?" Yeah? Now Ikrimah, by the way, was the person who witnessed one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? When he said to the he took some stones and he took some pebbles in his hand like this, and he came upon the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "If you are a prophet, tell me what I have in my hand. Tell me what I'm holding in my hand." And the Prophet ﷺ responded to him, "Rather, you ask what is in your hand, who I am." And Ikrimah, he holds these pebbles to his ear, and he hears the pebbles saying, "As-salatu was-salamu alayka ya Rasulullah." Yeah, or "Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah." Alright, and he said, "This is witchcraft," and he threw them away. Okay, this is Ikrimah. The Prophet says, "Hasn't the time come now for you to believe?" Now what's important to know about the people of Mecca, I don't want to get into a seerah lesson, although I seem to have wandered into one. The important thing here is that the seeds of the conversion of the Meccans in the 8th year after the Hijrah were sown very early on in the seerah. They were sown in the early life of the Prophet ﷺ, in what they knew about him, in their original reception to his message, all of those things. The seeds were planted then. But it took 20 years, or nearly 20 years, for those seeds to sprout, for that tree to blossom. It took almost 20 years for that to happen. But eventually it did. And the Prophet is asking Ikrimah, and Ikrimah says, I still don't believe. I still don't believe you're the messenger of Allah. Give me some time to think about it. Prophet says to Ikrimah, "How long do you want?" Ikrimah says, 2 months. The Prophet ﷺ told him, "Take 4. Take 4. Okay? Now, Ikrimah is living in Mecca. He's living in Mecca, which is now Muslim, which is largely populated by not just the original Qurayshis, but also those soldiers of the Prophet ﷺ that have come from all over the place and are in Mecca. They went to Ta'if and came back again. So there was a period when they were all kind of in Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca. And Ikrimah, who was previously the Don of Mecca, right? He's the dude. He's the, son of the great chieftain of the Meccans, Abu Jahl. Right? He is one of the leaders of the leaders of Mecca against the Muslims. Okay? He is a noble of the Quraysh. Right? Well, what does he find? He says now people are treating him differently. And what they do is they call him, when they call upon him, they say, "Ya ibn Abi Jahl." O son of Abu Jahl. Right? Now, what was Abu Jahl's name? Not quite. Umar ibn Abdul Hakam. His name was Umar. Umar ibn Abdul Hakam. Okay? Now, Ikrimah was actually Ikrimah ibn Abi al-Hakam. Right? Right? This was Ikrimah's actual name. But people started to call him. And in Arab society, you tend not to call somebody by their name. Right? You call them by their kunya, which is their Abu so-and-so. Right? So I am Abu Nur, actually. Alright? That's what I would be called in an Arab society. Alright? Nobody would call me Asim. Because it's a sign of, only people who are close to me would call me Asim. But, it's like you would say Mr. So-and-so. You would say Abu this. Or Ibn so, but if you had a great father, you would say Ibn so-and-so. Okay? Like we talk about Abu Hanifa. We talk about Ibn Hanbal. Okay? But people started to call him Ibn Abi Jahl, because Abu Jahl was his nickname, not just from the Muslims, but also from, you know, it began to sort of spread, this particular nickname of his, Abu Jahl. And he was quite hurt by this, okay? Because people were reminding, rather than calling him, because he had children, so rather than calling him Abu so-and-so, they were calling him by his father. And he was, well, and his father was the great enemy of the believers. The Prophet ﷺ heard this, and he said to the Muslims, he said, I've heard that you call Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, stop doing this. Yeah? You do not harm the living by cursing the dead, or by bad-mouthing the dead. Right? Do not harm the living by bad-mouthing the dead. Right? And the idea here is that it's not right to insult someone on the basis of the fact that they don't believe, on the basis of the fact that their parent was so-and-so, or that they are known for a particular thing. Okay? This is not an acceptable thing to do, not for any human. Why? Because this is about dignity. And one of the things that human beings need is dignity. And to be reminded about a failure or a shortcoming or whatever, this is not acceptable in our religion. And it is part of the human rights of, it's part of human rights in Islam. You should not belittle someone's dignity. Okay? Treat people in the way that they would wish to be treated, in other words. Okay? Equally, you know, nicknames. Yeah? How do nicknames work in Islam? Right? Can we have nicknames? Yeah, of course we can. Yeah? Of course we can. Sayyidina Ali had a nickname, which was? Abu Turab. Right? Abu Huraira, what was his nickname? Abu Huraira. What was his name? Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr was his name. Abu Huraira is a nickname, but no one knows his real name. Everyone's forgotten it. Yeah? Right? There are many like this. What's the most famous nickname? Juwayriya. No, Juwayriya wasn't a nickname. But you're close.
Say the Aisha nickname.
Humayra. Humayra. Humayra means?
Little rosy cheeks.
Little rosy cheeks. Well, little rose. Little rosy. Little red one. Yeah? Little red one, literally is what it means. But what it effectively translates to is rosy cheeks. And this was the nickname of the Prophet ﷺ for his wife, Sayyidah Aisha. Okay? But the rule on nicknames is that nicknames should not be hurtful. This is the basic rule. Nicknames should not be hurtful. Okay? And who decides if a nickname is hurtful? The person who's been called the nickname, not you. So this thing about you say something, you say, well, I'm only joking. Can't you take a joke? No, they can't take a joke. Not about that. So don't make it. So don't make it. Don't be cruel. Don't belittle someone's dignity. So this is a human right. Right? Not just for Muslims, but for non-Muslims as well. Okay. The right to physical assistance, food, shelter, medical help, and other such things. So we come across this, we'll do a Fatiha today for the people of Indonesia who've died. I think the numbers are going up into the thousands now, aren't they, actually, in the tsunami. But in the same way as, it is our obligation to render assistance to them, it is our obligation to render assistance to non-Muslims who are in states of extreme or dire need. Whether they be in the Congo, whether they be in Haiti, or whether they be in the Caribbean, it doesn't matter. Okay? This is a right that people have over us as human beings, by virtue of them being human. Right? So charitable endeavours, the only thing that is not permissible to give to non-Muslims, that it is permissible to give to Muslims, is zakat. But then bear in mind that most Muslims, it's not permissible to give zakat to most Muslims, because most Muslims aren't poor enough. Okay? Assisting those who are in dire need is a fundamental religious obligation. Okay? So there's no question about that, and that's not about zakat. That's just what you have. Give what you have and give what you can afford to people who are in situations of dire need. Okay? Even in those cases where the Sharia has given permission to punish someone, do not be cruel or excessive, nor threaten them unjustly. Okay? And then the right to da'wah, the right to be called to God. Now what this does, by the way, that's a critical one. The right to be called to God. It is that right that is actually the basis of jihad. So if you want to know what jihad is about, the legal basis of jihad is to permit calling to God. To create conditions where people may be called unto Allah, where people are free to accept Islam. This is in circumstances where, if there's a situation where, as in most of these historical circumstances, being a Muslim in the wrong place would have basically been a death sentence. Yeah, you had no rights. All right, if you were a Muslim in the wrong place. Okay, people would be prohibited from converting to Islam even if they wished to. This actually is where you get the notion of jihad, what's called offensive jihad, kicks in. So there are three types of jihad basically. One is defensive, one is preemptive, and one is offensive. Okay? And this, just as a quick, because we don't have a module on jihad, you'd be surprised to know, in Path to Salvation. Just a quick explanation of jihad. Alright? And jihad, by jihad here, I mean qital fi sabilillah. I mean fighting in the way of God. I don't mean spiritual struggle, and I mean actual fighting in the way of Allah, holy war. Right? What is the basic principles? If you look across Muslim history, the history of the seerah, what you have is the longest period of the seerah is the Meccan seerah. 13 years in the Meccan seerah, alright, plus a year of the Medinan period in which fighting is prohibited. Full stop. Fighting is not allowed. Okay? Then you have a period of defensive warfare. Okay? War is permitted on the basis of a direct threat. Okay? And that covers Badr, Uhud, the various Saraya, or expeditions, military expeditions that took place. Badr, Uhud, Khandaq. Okay? These three major battles in the early Medinan period, the 2nd, 3rd, and the 5th year of the Hijrah. This is pure defensive jihad. Okay? Then you have a period of preemptive jihad. And preemptive jihad is you identify a threat, you march out to meet the threat before the threat becomes an active threat. Okay? So a great example of that is Khaybar. Right? The sieges of Khaybar. Khaybar was a network of fortresses, Jewish fortresses to the north of Medina. It presented a significant hostile military force that were very well entrenched in very strong fortresses that needed to be dealt with, because you couldn't deal with the threat of Mecca in the south and Khaybar in the north at the same time. Okay? So this is called preemptive jihad. These are actively, people who are actively hostile, who you march out against rather than waiting for them to come marching to you. Okay? And this relates to, if some of you have heard of what's called the art of war. Alright, this famous Chinese work called The Art of War. Written by a philosopher is the wrong word, but written by a Chinese thinker called Sun Tzu. And one of the things that he says there is, if you choose your battlefield, If you choose your battlefield, you will win 99 times out of 100. Yeah, so choose the terrain that suits you. All right, this is the Prophet did this. You see this in the military strategy of the Prophet. Okay. And lastly, you have what's called pure offensive jihad, which in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ really was a theoretical idea. The Prophet never actually engaged in this, but it is something that the fuqaha have said is permissible. And this is where, if there is a place where Muslims are not, where a person would not be allowed to be a Muslim, or that people who could receive the message of Islam are not able to act on that message of Islam, this is where offensive warfare is permissible in order not to convert people, but rather to create the opportunity to allow people to convert themselves. Okay? So that's basically how these things have been looked at. Each of them have their rules and their responsibilities, and who has to do them and so forth. So when you are actively being attacked, then the ruling is that fighting is obligatory upon every single person, man, woman, child, everyone. If you are actively being attacked and besieged, then someone comes into your home, and then an enemy soldier comes into your home. Who is allowed to fight and who must fight? Everyone. Everyone. Okay? If it is a more structured but not such an emergency situation, then who is fighting obligatory upon? The adult males who are healthy. Adult males who are healthy. Right? Who have the capability to do so. And it keeps on going and it keeps on going. And the number of people who engage in it gets kind of less and less as you go further. So this is how this works. And this is in a society, bear in mind, this was not what is called today, or has been called over the 20th century, total warfare. Okay? These are battles in which people are fighting hand to hand. All right? The nature of warfare has changed massively over the last, well, about 120 years. Right? With the invention of gunpowder, the invention of ranged weapons, not so much gunpowder, but the invention of things like cannons, missiles, and so forth, the nature of warfare has completely changed. Okay? So you see this in World War I, in the Battle of Britain. Where was the Battle of Britain fought? Yeah, exactly. Quite right. Yeah? In the air. The Battle of Britain was fought in the skies. German bombers, right, who could fly over trench lines, fly over army battle lines, all right, and would bomb Coventry Cathedral, right, bomb places in Birmingham and London and so on and so forth. And these are civilian populations that are being bombed, right, and it worked the other way as well. Okay, so we hear about the RAF and the Battle of Britain and that kind of stuff, and how and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, towards the end of World War II, what did you have? You have the firebombing of Dresden. Right, firebombing of Dresden is the use of incendiary weapons. Incendiary weapons, bombs that explode and make fire, basically. Right, Dresden, a city in Germany, absolutely gutted. Absolutely. Absolutely gutted by these incendiary weapons. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people possible. Well, not hundreds, but tens of thousands of people killed. And of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Right? In the Asian theatre of war, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which I don't need to explain to you, but that was the only wartime use of nuclear weapons ever. In all of history. It's never been done since. The only time nuclear weapons have been used in war is to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nagasaki was a military target. Hiroshima was a town. Hiroshima was a civilian town. So Nagasaki is one thing, that's a military installation. Yeah? But Hiroshima was a town which had 150,000 people living there. Okay? The nature of warfare has changed beyond recognition. The reason that we live in a world where there are multiple peace treaties, You have a UN, you have all these things. You know, the reason that there has not been a major world war since World War II is because collectively human beings have realized that this is just too devastating. This is just too devastating for this ever to really happen again. Okay? Some of you here, I'm looking around, but some of you might remember, I remember as a very young child doing nuclear weapon drills. Yeah, so I remember there would be a little class, and they would say, if you hear the sirens going off, or if there's a system in the UK at the moment. There is a system, an air raid warning system. These things still exist. They've never been sounded, but they still exist. Yeah, that if you hear that there's a bomb that's been dropped, a nuclear bomb that's been dropped, then if you are this far away, then you need to find the nearest air raid shelter. And there were at that time still air raid shelters. If it was dropped close, the stupidest advice possible, which is turn the table on its side and crouch beneath the table. And that's going to protect you. All right, but I remember doing this in the 80s, right, in the early 80s, when the threat of nuclear war was an actual, real threat. Yeah, that the United States and UK and Russia or the Soviet Union are going to destroy each other with a nuclear weapon strike. There's a book. I think it's called 11 Minutes to Midnight or something like that, right? But it's about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and about during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the point of greatest tension between the Soviet Union and the West. Yeah, a Russian soldier who is kind of scanning radar, like a radar operator. He picks up a blip. He picks up a blip on the radar. Yeah? That looks like a nuclear weapon heading towards the Soviet Union. And he had to decide what to do about this. Right? Do I immediately inform the Soviet High Command that a missile has been launched? Or do I wait because it might be an anomaly? That guy waited and saved the world. There are very few people in human history that you can say actually saved the world, but that guy's one of them. Because had he phoned up Soviet High Command and said the US had launched a missile, and it was just a mistake, it was a radar, a blip on the radar that was a mistake. Had he actually phoned up Soviet High Command and said the Soviets would launch a counter-strike immediately, as soon as the Americans saw those missiles in the air, the Americans would launch their missiles, and that would be the end of the world. I mean, literally, that would be the end of human civilization. And it took him 11 minutes until he figured out that it was an error. Yeah? So we have the capacity to do this. Now, take all of that, and you compare this to the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. And there have been books written on this. Okay? In the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, there were 81 separate military campaigns. 81. Right? And the total casualty figures on both sides, including Badr, Uhud, the Battle of the Trench, Khaybar, the Conquest of Mecca, the Battle of Taif, all of these things, and the Battle of Mu'tah and all these things, the total casualties max out, the maximum estimate is 1,000 people. 1,000 people across 80 campaigns. What does that mean? It means that most of the battles of the Prophet ﷺ were nothing of the sort. Were nothing of the sort. Yeah, it was a few men riding out and nothing happening. Nothing happening. The most famous nothing happened was the final military expedition of the Prophet ﷺ, which was the campaign of Tabuk. Tabuk is near the border of Jordan. The Prophet ﷺ in the 10th year, or the 9th year I should say, of the Hijrah, marches out, takes a month to march through the desert in the heat, the height of the Arabian summer, right? Marches through the desert, not on any of the well-known paths, but on some of the alternate, just sort of through the, forging their own path through the desert, because they heard that there was a rumor that the Byzantines, i.e. the Romans, were going to mount an assault on Mecca, or rather mount an assault on the tribes, the Arabian tribes that had pledged allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ and entered Islam. They sent message to Medina that we hear that the Romans are going to invade us. And I won't go into the deep political reasons for this, but it was all about alliances and stuff. So that we've heard that the Romans are going to do this. What happens? Yeah. What happens is that the Prophet ﷺ takes his army, takes the believers, and he marches out through the desert. It takes a month for them to get to this place. They arrive there and they wait there for 5 days. There's no sign of the Roman legions. They turn back and they come home. Okay? The amount of casualties you're talking about is very, very small, generally in these sorts of battles. Alright? And this is important for us to understand. So all of these forms, so there was warfare in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It was a time of warfare. Okay? But if you look at the nature of that warfare, what you find is that it results in very few casualties. Okay? Because people are fighting hand to hand. And because the Muslims are told in the Quran that if your enemy sue for peace, then stop fighting. If the white flag is raised, stop. Even if you think they're being insincere. Okay? There are all sorts of rules around this. And the campaigns of the Muslims, yeah, were largely involved very little actual fighting. The point of all the hadith about the virtues of jihad and martyrdom in the way of Allah is putting yourself in a place where that might happen. It was the potential for it to happen. The Prophet ﷺ famously, before one of the battles, says to the companions, "Oh, my companions, do not wish for death. Do not wish for death. Instead, pray for afiyah. Pray for a life of comfort and ease. Okay? But if you must fight, then be steadfast and know that paradise lies under the shadow of your sword." Now, of that whole hadith, the only thing that's ever mentioned is paradise lies under the shadow of the sword. Yeah? But you take that hadith in its context, what is the Prophet ﷺ saying? He's saying we don't want to fight. We shouldn't long to fight. We shouldn't long to die. We don't have, the sunnah is not to have a death culture, to glorify death. The Prophet ﷺ did not celebrate when people were martyred. He wept when people were martyred. He wept for those left behind, for the families, the children left behind. Okay? But if it comes, then you be brave. And that's the mark of a real warrior. This is the type of thing that you learn when you study martial arts properly. Don't go looking for a fight. Don't go looking for a fight. But if you have to fight, here's how you finish it quickly. Basically, here's how you win. Okay? And that's the principle. That's the principle of jihad in our religion. The jihad. Jihad is the laws that come with the Prophet ﷺ are the first time, I believe, in human history when laws of warfare were put into place. That you actually have rules saying what you can do and what you can't do. Do not kill non-combatants. Do not kill women. Do not kill the elders. Do not kill children. Do not kill monks in their monasteries who are seeking God. These are non-Muslim monks, mind you, who are seeking God. Do not cut down trees. or do not cut down flowering trees. Do not despoil the crops. These are the types of rules these are the types of rules that Islam puts into place. Yeah, way before anyone else was thinking about doing this sort of thing. Because warfare was a part of life at that time. Right? And it has been a part of life for most of human history, for most human beings through most of their history. Warfare is just a part of life. Okay? What's changed in the last 100 years is the ability to bring mass destruction. And that changes the calculus completely. Okay? The purpose of jihad, as I said, come back to the original point, is simply to bring about freedom. That's the purpose of jihad, to bring about freedom. Specifically here, the freedom of people to choose their faith. Because this was not a given, as I said to you before, this was not a given in most of human history. Okay? And the fascinating thing is the most constructive discussions I have ever had about jihad have been with the military. I've actually been with the military, the UK military. When I sat down and spoken to the Deputy Chief of the Armed Forces about jihad, about the nature of jihad. Yeah, when I've spoken to the head of the Council of Ethics for the Armed Forces of the United Kingdom, and we've discussed theories of just warfare. Yeah, why? Because they're military people. They understand what fighting's about. Yeah, and they actually have the greatest appreciation for the Islamic laws of jihad, the Islamic rules of jihad. Yeah, it's fascinating when you actually get into it. But anyhow, that's that. Now then, if you look at these rights together, all these human rights together, all right? The thing I want you to learn about this, and the thing I want you to take away, the underlying principle, okay, that all human beings, Muslim, non-Muslim, doesn't matter, all human beings are not to be troubled in terms of their wealth and their person. Okay, not to be harmed. First right, to not be harmed, either physically or financially. Second, not to be harmed psychologically. Not to be harmed in terms of your dignity and your honour and your self-esteem. Thirdly, the right to be helped when you are in situations of severe distress. Okay? Fourthly, the right to not be treated or threatened with cruelty. And fifthly, the right to receive da'wah and to find God. Let me put it that way: to find God. What these rights entail is that it becomes very difficult when you have these things in mind to perform what's called othering. Anyone know what othering is? Clues in the name.
It's okay to consider the other person.
To consider those who are not in your group to be fundamentally different from you. Okay? Every instance of mass cruelty in warfare, okay, and there are many of these. I'm not going to name them, okay, but there are many of them. Every instance of mass cruelty, right, genocide, all these types of things, requires one thing to happen. Because every single one is conducted by people like you and me. There's no difference. It's people like you and me. Alright? I remember I was once, when I was training as a junior doctor in South Africa, I remember there was, very rarely would meet white people in South Africa because the society was all very, very segregated. Even though it was after apartheid, the society was still very segregated. But I remember there was one white guy, he was a doctor, and he had come and he was doing a shift or whatever. We were sitting around talking one day, and he was telling us about his time in the army. Because in South Africa, all the whites in South Africa had to serve 2 years in the army. There was conscription at that time. They had to serve 2 years in the army. And they would go into a place called Angola, which is the town to the north. And he says, I remember, he says, some of my friends, some of my army buddies, yeah, there was a game that they would play, yeah? They would drive into Angola in the night. And they would cross the border, they would drive into Angola, and they would randomly kill people. Randomly kill people, anyone. And then they would cut an ear off, and they would bring the ears back to the base of South Africa. And there was a competition as to who could collect the most ears. And he says those guys today are dentists, accountants, family people.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah, hayya ala salah, hayya ala falah, hayya ala falah. Qad qamati salah, qad qamati salah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah.
Ishan, is the prayer going to be broadcast? He says these people are now family men. They have children, they love their children. Yeah? They are dentists, they are your neighbors. Inshallah we'll pray just now. They are your neighbors. They're just ordinary people. There was a story during the Rwandan, the Rwandan genocide. Yeah? The people went to interview the people that did, and these are, in the Rwandan genocide was the, after the Holocaust, was the worst massacre of the 20th century. Yeah? Worst massacre of the 20th century. Shall we just go pray? Shall we? We'll figure that well. Stop in a horrible point. Huh? We'll go down and pray. Chill out. Please adjust and take a break. Sorry, it's a horrible place to stop. I have to be continued. الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So we took a break at a slightly unexpected place. I think we were talking about othering. In order for people to treat each other in this way, in order for people, ordinary people, yeah, so people like you and me, to be able, and this is important to understand, you know, you have to emphasize this. Humans have the potential, as mentioned by some of the awliya Allah, humans have the potential to be higher than angels, and humans have the potential to be worse than devils. Okay? One of the mashayikh said that, you know, the things that humans can, you know, humans can dream, can imagine things that angels have never dreamed of, and imagine things that devils wouldn't even dare to. All right, and all of us have that potential inside us. Don't kid yourself. I was talking to you, I think, about the Rwandan genocide, where, as I said, it was after the Holocaust, the Second World War. It was the worst massacre in the 20th century, and possibly in human history. 4 million people were killed. 4 million civilians were killed, and not by bombs and missiles, but with machetes. With machetes. Alright? And people who went afterwards to try it again to understand how this is possible, say that they would speak to some of these chaps, and they would, the people who committed these crimes, and they would say that we used to wake up in the mornings, kiss our children, take our machetes and go and massacre people and do all sorts of other things. Yeah, burning people alive in churches, this sort of thing. Then we would come home, we would wash the blood off the blades. We'd go and have a bath. We would kiss our children again, and we would sit down for supper. After doing all of that, and people said, and the interviewer said, "How is it possible? How can you switch like that?" And they would say, "Well, those people, they're not humans. They're like insects. They're like cockroaches. You just got to get rid of them." And this is dehumanization. This is dehumanization. The first step in being able to do something like that is to dehumanize the other. For those who are not in your group, for Tutsis to dehumanize Hutus, and for Hutus to dehumanize Tutsis, for Germans to dehumanize Jews, for Jews or for Israelis to dehumanize Palestinians, right? For Buddhists, for Buddhist Burmese to dehumanize Rohingyas. This isn't a religious thing. This is a human thing. All right? How do you protect yourself from that? You have to be able to see the human in the other. You have to recognize that there's a human being there. That's what stops you. That recognition of humanity. You see, in World War I, a lot of the soldiers, they found, when they did some sort of experimenting, they found that they deliberately shot to miss. So when they were firing at each other, they were actually aiming to miss, not to hit. There was something in them that just, you're pointing and and then you shoot. Why? Because they recognize the human in the other person. Okay? These rights that Islam affords to all human beings are critical because they prevent dehumanization. That everyone, and this is, you see, why was the warfare of the Prophet ﷺ in the way that it was, because he never forgot the human in the other person. He never forgot that those enemies were humans who had not seen the light. And this is the critical thing to understand, especially in those sorts of situations. Yeah.
I remember in Uhud, when Sayyidina Umar asked the Prophet to curse the non-believers. I forget the Prophet's exact response, but it was
Allahumma ighfir li qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun, that one.
yeah, so they do not know.
Yeah, oh Allah, forgive my people. The Prophet, when he was asked to curse. Now what is cursing? Cursing is distancing people. When you curse someone, you distance them. Alright? What did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, I have not been sent to curse people. I have been sent as a mercy to the worlds. Oh Allah, forgive my people. They know not what they do. Alright? This is the way of the Prophet ﷺ. Don't ever forget that the person who you are hostile towards, who you are unfriendly towards. I mean, in our case, it's very small things. Yeah? Yeah? But the soldier on the other side of the battlefield, the people across that border, these people, the people who have different colour skin, who speak a different language, these people are human. And they have far more in common with you than anything that divides you. This, you are looking, every time you see another human being, you are looking at a potential wali, a potential saint. Everyone, doesn't matter how deep they are in sin, but they have the potential to become a friend of God. Right? We unfortunately live in an environment where this sort of dehumanization is occurring all the time in small ways. So you look at places like Rotherham and Oxford and Sheffield, where they've had all these various grooming things. And you ask these guys, well, why did you do this? Oh, they're just white girls. They're not like our Muslim girls. They're just white girls. They do this anyway. They become okay now, because they're different. Because they're different. This is dehumanization. This is othering. This is othering. Yeah? It's a very easy trap to fall into, unfortunately. It's a very easy trap to fall into. Recognition of these rights, recognition of this understanding is something that is something that can prevent you from falling into this, worst of the traps of the shaitan. Okay? Is your question?
About online trolling, because
online trolling is fascinating because it is exactly the same. It's a form of dehumanization, but it's virtually a dehumanization of yourself. So what you do the online troll, who if you met them on the met them on the street would be as polite as anything. I mean, I've had a few trolls in my day, and I've known their identities. I've known who they are. I get religious trolling, right? Because I'm not enough of this and I'm too much of that, and that sort of thing. Right? Some of these guys kiss my hand when they greet me, when they come and see me. But online, behind the persona, you feel free to say the worst things. And this is tiny. This is tiny. Get a woman in the public sphere speaking up about feminism or speaking up about, gender injustice. What happens? Yeah, people, end up, receiving death threats and all kinds of things. Yeah, worse than death threats. How is that? How does that happen? Well, here what you have is the reversal of dehumanization. You're not dehumanizing the other, you dehumanize yourself. When you are hiding behind an online persona, you feel free, and there have been studies done on this, you feel free to say things that you would never say in real life. that you would never do otherwise if you were face to face with someone. Yeah? Because of, for various reasons, but one of those reasons is you feel that you can't be seen. You can't be identified. The people whose opinion matters to you can't trace that thing back to you. Yeah? And this is, again, it's not new, it's just a different manifestation. So the ulama from a long time in the past would talk about the idea of the wali in the masjid and the shaitan at home. The man who is a wali in the masjid and a shaitan at home. To everyone else, he's very religious, he's very polite, he's like this, he's like that, he's the other. Once he gets into his house, when it's just his wife, his children, he turns into a different person. Yeah? Different qualities start to manifest. Now, which one is he? Is he the wali or is he the shaitan? Well, he's both. I mean, he's not a wali, but is he the pious person or is he the shaitan? He's both. He's both. Humans can hold this type of thing. They can hold these contradictions when they don't understand. When they don't understand themselves and they don't understand the reality of those qualities. This is where this happens. I remember one of our mashayikh was talking about piety and righteousness. He's from Pakistan. Talking about piety and righteousness. And he was talking about people who come to the masjid 5 times a day. Five times namazis in the masjid for Jamaat. Yeah? Read a juz, 2 juz of Quran a day. Okay? But when they go, they own a milk factory. And they cut into the milk soap to thicken it. So they can make extra money. Something like that. They cut milk, they cut soap into the milk or something. Even though it's harmful to the people that drink it, but they can make extra money because they can sell more of it. Yeah? He said, this is not piety. These people don't understand what piety is. Because they think that piety is in the action. Piety is not in the action. Piety is ha-huna. The Prophet ﷺ said, At-taqwa ha-huna. At-taqwa ha-huna. At-taqwa ha-huna. Piety is in the heart. And this comes from a lack of understanding of religion. If you think you can fulfill the rights of God, but not fulfill the rights of creation, and be a righteous person, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're just an ordinary Joe. It doesn't matter how much you pray, you're just an ordinary Joe. You've got to do both. You can't fly with one wing. Right? You can't fly with one wing. So it's important for us to understand. That's why this module is a very important module. So, remember, you are never alone. Never. Allah is always with you. Huwa ma'akum aynama kuntum. He is with you wherever you are. There's one of the famous hadiths on sincerity. It's called the hadith of the three travelers. The hadith goes that I'll just tell you part of it, but the hadith goes that in the time of the Bani Israel there were 3 travelers who one night there was a storm, so they sought shelter in a cave and they went to sleep in the cave. But the storm, during the storm, a huge rock got dislodged and fell over the mouth of the cave. So they couldn't get out, and they tried and push with all of the 3 of them together to try and push this rock out of the way or move this rock. They couldn't move it. Eventually they said, you know what, there's nothing we can do here. All we can do is ask Allah. And each of them asked Allah for the sake of the most righteous act they had ever performed. By the best deed they had ever performed. So one of them says, and this is the one I wanted to, there are 3 of them, but the one I wanted to say. He says, Oh Allah, I had a female cousin who was very beautiful, and I desired her intensely. I desired her intensely, but she would always refuse me. Now, he's not talking about marriage. She would always refuse me. Okay? And the more she refused me, the more I desired her. Until one day, she fell on hard times. She was starving. She had I think a child or a youngest brother, but the parents had died, couldn't feed, had no food for the child. And she came to me. She asked for my help. And I said to her, I will help you if you let me do what I want to. And so she says, okay. She says, okay. She was that desperate. So he gave her the food, she went, she fed her family, and then she came. And he says, I came to her, and there was no one else there. Until, and the hadith says, until I was between her legs. And then she said, looked at me and she said, fear God. Fear God. And it was like, and the exact wording of the hadith is, but I'll translate it idiomatically, it was like a splash of cold water on my face. And I kind of, like that, and I left her. I didn't touch her, I left her. And I said to her, whatever, if you want anything, you come and ask me, I will never ask you of anything again. Oh Allah, if I did that action just for your sake, if I did that action purely out of fear for you, i.e. out for pure sincerity, move this rock from its place. And the rock moves. And there's three of them, and each time the rock moves a little bit, until they can all get out. But that hadith, that part of the hadith illustrates something. What is it that prevents you from doing what you desire when you have the power to do it? And there is no one there to stop you. There is no one there to look at you in disapproval. No one will know about it. I remember a survey once, I don't really believe it, but I remember someone sent a survey around once that was done in America or something, in college students in America, that if there was no possibility of it ever being discovered, would you rape someone? And 60% said yes. 60% said yes. If there was no possibility of it ever being discovered. Now, are you shocked at the 60% or are you shocked at the 40%? Which one are you shocked at? You expecting to find good character in people just like that? What is it that prevents most people from doing bad things? Other people. Not God. Not taqwa. Other people. Someone might find out. I might get caught. Now, do you see how important taqwa is? Our desires are very, very strong. The nafs is very, very strong. It is very hard to overcome the nafs. It is very hard to be good. It is only by the grace of God, only by the grace of God, that we escape from the black hole of the urgings of the nafs. And it is by taqwa that that happens. By fear of the one who is always present. Now I know two, except that he is the third. There are no three, except that he is the fourth. Nor less than that, nor more than that. He is with you wherever you are. If you can understand that, really understand it, you don't need to come for these classes. You don't need to know any more. If you can understand that. This Bedouin came to you, I've told you this before, but this Bedouin comes to the Prophet ﷺ. He says, Ya Muhammad, he's Bedouin. Ya Muhammad. Prophet ﷺ says, yes. He says, is it true that your Lord said, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. Whoever does the tiniest bit of good, they will see it. And whoever does the tiniest bit of evil, they will see it. Prophet ﷺ said, yes. He said, that's all I need to know. And he went on. The Prophet ﷺ said he spoke the truth. That's all he needs to know. He doesn't need to know anything else. Just that. What does it mean he will see it? See its consequence? See its reward? I was talking to my family, we were having a conversation about something, we got onto judgment. We're going to talk about forgiveness. If someone does you wrong and you forgive them, do they still have to answer for it? Possibly. Yeah, possibly. Allah will replay your life to you on the Day of Judgment. But you'll see your life from a different perspective. Can you imagine that you're watching the movie of your life? Possibly not in a cinema for one, by the way. Possibly in front of everyone. Yeah? That what happens in your secret moments, when you're by yourself, when you think no one is around. Yeah? A word that you said to someone, and then you follow that person and you see how that word affected their life. You don't know what happened to them, but you think you said something. You don't know what happened to them after that. You don't know how it affected them. But if you can see all of that, yeah, you see the reality of the actions. Not their form, but their reality. Yara. You will see it. If you can understand this, you don't need to know anything else. This is sufficient for you. These two verses of Quran are sufficient for this world and hereafter. But people find it difficult to understand this. People find it difficult not just to know it, but to action it, to practice on it. And so what happens? What do we do? Well, Allah has to put in external rules to make sure that the worst excesses and urges of people are kept in check. That's what these rights are. That's what they do for us. They protect us from ourselves. Because we need protection from ourselves. Others need protection from us. And if you are listening to what I am saying and thinking to yourself, that doesn't sound like me. That doesn't sound like me at all. Alhamdulillah. Give thanks to Allah that you've not been put in that position. Because that's all it is. This is just about situation. Yeah? Those Hutu tribesmen would kiss their children and then go and cut people up with machetes. Yeah? Those doctors and dentists and accountants would randomly shoot people, cut off their ears and bring it back to base and have a laugh about it. That's you and me in a different situation, in a different life circumstance. That's all it is. What protects you from yourself? Your Lord. Strengthen that bond. Then you will see wonders. Then you will see wonders. Khair. The rights of the neighbor. The rights of the neighbor is mentioned before the rights of Muslims. Why? Because they are entitled to these rights whether they are Muslim or not. And the texts about neighbors do not distinguish between, the hadith I mean, about referring to neighbors do not refer to Muslim neighbors or non-Muslim neighbors, they just mean neighbors. And for much of Islamic history, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the neighbors of the Sahaba would not have been Muslim necessarily. Right? In the Meccan period, very few of your neighbors would have been Muslim. Even in the Medinan period, for a long stretch of the Medinan period, a lot of your neighbors would not have been Muslim. Okay? So, what is the neighbor? first. This is the first thing to understand before we talk about their rights, because you'd be surprised what the Prophet ﷺ says about neighbors. Okay? What is your neighbor? So, the way to understand this is that your neighbor is not about geographical proximity. It's not just the person who lives in the house next door to you. Right? It is people whose lives your actions impact. Right? People whose lives your actions impact. So you've got, you're eating chicken and chips, all right? And you want to, and you're walking down your street, and the box is finished. You want to chuck it away. There's no bin around, and you're coming up to your house, and you can't be bothered holding this thing because it's very heavy. Empty box. It's very heavy. So you can't be bothered holding it until you get to your house and put it in your own bin. So you want to chuck it somewhere. And you say, oh, Sheikh Asim said, I must be good to my neighbors. So I'll chuck it in the one after that, I'll chuck it in his yard. Yeah, that's cool. I'm still being good to my neighbor. No, that's your neighbor too, because your actions impact on that person. Okay? You're having a mawlid. In your house, you put up a tent in the back garden. Right? And someone has come to read naats. Right? Now it's getting a bit late, 10, 11 o'clock at night. But this is a praise of the Prophet ﷺ. Uncle G wants to read one more naat. And of course, the mic is turned up to 10. Right? The sound is turned up to 10. Right? With full reverb on. An echo. Right? And Uncle G starts, Allahu alayka ya Rasulullah. And the people down the road can hear it. The people down the road can hear it. Now Uncle G's voice is not that, Uncle G's not a nightingale. Uncle G's more of a crow. He may be singing the song of a nightingale, but he's still a crow. Right? What's happening? Who's your neighbor here? There's a person at the end of the street being affected by it. The guy who's got to get up at 5 in the morning. He's got to wake up at 5 in the morning. Because he's just started a new job. And his mortgage is depending on him being at that job on time. And he's on his last warning. He's trying to get to sleep. That's your neighbor. The people whose lives you impact with your actions. This is what your neighbor is. Okay? There is an increased responsibility towards such people because of your increased interaction towards them. Okay? Here's the principle. The more likely they are to benefit from your good adab, and the more likely they are to be harmed by bad adab, the greater their rights over you. The greater their rights over you. Okay? So sometimes I will get into I'm going to use because Sufyan is here, so I'm going to use big inverted commas. I'll get into a DIY mode. Okay, now my DIY is like, sticking one nail in the wall to hang a painting or that sort of thing. That's my DIY, that's the extent of my DIY. And I will decide, because my wife's been asking me for a long time to put up this frame. I'll say, okay, fine, I'm going to do it now. And it's 8 p.m. And I'll put the boom, and she'll say, what are you doing? And I'll say, I'm hanging up the painting. You want me to have it? It's so late, you'll disturb our neighbors. It's 8 o'clock. Who sleeps at 8 o'clock? Don't you know Michelle gets up at 5 in the morning to go to work? She sleeps early. Don't do this. And then it goes for 3 months. It'll sit in the cupboard now. You've got to be careful what you wish for. Right? Okay? But this is consideration. This is about consideration. Who is going to be harmed? Just the person in the adjoining house. Not the people on the other side. Right? Not the people across the street. They won't be harmed. But who has that right? That person has that right. We need to think about this because people are affected by our actions. Our good actions and our bad actions. People are affected by them. And Allah has put a great emphasis on this. The Prophet ﷺ said, Jibreel alayhi salam emphasized the rights of neighbors so much to me that I thought he would make them inheritors. Can you imagine if your neighbors were your inheritors? And you die and they inherit some of your money? that means they are virtually family. They're virtually family. The only difference between family and neighbors is blood. That's the only difference. But in terms of proximity, in terms of your relationship with them and so forth, this is the type of relationship we seek to foster. Yeah.
It appears that Muslims are the least considerate of people in terms of litter, parking, anything that you name it. Why do you think that's the case?
Are Muslims the least considerate people? I don't know. I think we are hypersensitive towards Muslim behavior. We all think this sometimes. I often will kind of grumble about,
Mogadishu.
Baba, you know what Mogadishu and Mirpur now? Okay.
In Birmingham.
Oh, I see in Birmingham. Yeah, all right, fair enough. Yeah, little Mirpur, little Mogadishu. Yeah, okay, fair enough. It's a good question, to be honest. It's a good question. Yeah. I genuinely don't know the reason that this is the case, but it does seem to be the case. That there is an inconsideration. Yeah? And there's a lack of community spirit, perhaps the wrong word, but pride in your community. Alright? This should not be the case. Unfortunately it is, and it's something that needs to be remedied. But one of the ways it can be remedied is by talking about your neighborhood. The rights of neighbors is a very neglected topic. Yeah? I remember I was asked once to give a talk or to teach a class to Muslims on citizenship. Citizenship, that's a proper British government type thing, citizenship. Yeah? And I said, and someone said to me, they want to give you a talk. They want you to give a talk on citizenship. So I was like, okay. I said, yeah, that's fine. Oh, really? Really? Yeah. Okay. I said, that's just a talk on the adab of being a neighbor. That's all that is. That's easy. That's a sunnah. Being a good citizen is being a good neighbor. That's just the sunnah. That's easy. I can do it now. Yeah? Oh, is that? I said, yeah. It should be part of the curriculum. Yeah? We have got something to contribute to this. We have a religious obligation. Good citizenship is a religious obligation. Oh. I said, well, there you go. I said, I didn't know that. I said, but that's the problem. The problem is Muslims don't know this. We need to know this. The Prophet ﷺ talks about this a lot. There are whole chapters in the books of hadith about neighbors. Yeah? Whoever believes in Allah on the last day, فَلْيُكْرِمْ جَارَهُ مَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيُكْرِمْ جَارَهُ. Whoever believes in God on the last day, let them honor their neighbor. So who are your neighbors? This is the principle, as I've said to you. Okay? Those who are the more likely a person is to benefit from your good adab, and the more likely they are to be harmed by your bad adab, the more rights they have over you. Okay? So, there are many textual sources. I'm not going to go through them now, but there are many of them. I mentioned a few of them to you already. Okay? The point is here to understand who your neighbors are and what are the nature of the rights we have towards them. So what types of neighbors do you have? And this is straight, by the way, out of from Imam Nawawi. This is from Imam Nawawi. Okay? You have immediate neighbors, those who are in the same house as you. Those who live in the same house as you are your neighbors. Okay? And in addition to whatever other rights they may have over you, they also have rights over you because they are your neighbors. But if, for example, you were in a house share or a flat share, okay, it's those people. Then close neighbors, those who are next to your home, next to your home. One of the hadith mentions the Prophet said, he was asked, Ya Rasulullah, who are my neighbors? He said, everyone within 40 steps of your door. Everyone within 40 steps of your door. Okay? What does that mean then? Your street. Yeah, your street, but also the people whose, your back fence of your garden is the back fence of their garden. They're your neighbours too. Neighbours on that side. Yeah, the neighbours behind your house. The neighbours across the street. Okay? Far neighbours is your neighbourhood. Is your neighbourhood. And then distant neighbours is your country. Or your city. City or country. Okay? Those are your neighbours by location. That is geographic. Then there are neighbours by situation. So your travel companions are your neighbours. The person sitting next to you on the bus is your neighbour. For that period. Okay? The person in the car next to you who's trying to squeeze in because he's in the wrong lane and he needs to go that way. That's your neighbour. Alright? Your occupational neighbours, your work colleagues are your neighbours. Your schoolmates are your neighbours. These people who share the classroom with you. Alright? And your prayer neighbours. Each of you are neighbours on a Sunday afternoon and evening. Each of you are neighbours. Right? And they have a right over you. Okay? What are those rights? Two basic rights. That you don't harm them. Firstly, that you don't harm them either deliberately or incidentally, i.e., by an unintended consequence of your actions. An unintended but predictable consequence of your actions. And the second is that they have a right for preference for your goodness. If you can do some good, that you do some good to them first, and then to others. There are, for example, we mentioned about this, I think, when we were doing zakat, that if you speak to when you look in the books of fiqh about transferring zakat to a different town or paying zakat overseas, that sort of thing. In the classical works of fiqh, pretty much across the madhabs, the ulama say this is makruh. It is disliked to take zakat out of the town. Why? One of the reasons is that your neighbours, i.e. the people of the town, the poor of your town, have greater right to your zakat than people of another town. Some of the ulama add, even if your family live in the other town, your neighbours in this town who are not related to you have more right. Okay? In our circumstance, it's quite hard actually to find Muslims in England who are, who are zakat recipients. It's not that hard, but it's a little bit hard to find them. The way to find them, if you want to find them, is to go to an organisation like the National Zakat Foundation, or if Islamic Relief has a branch for zakat in this country and so on, go to them. And if you feel that maybe a person is, worthy of receiving zakat, tell them to go to those places and apply. These guys will check their records and finances and say, yes, you can claim zakat and so forth. So there are ways of doing this. But the other, in fact, fascinating that it's a fiqh point, it comes a little bit later, that it's called shuf'a. And shuf'a is the right of first refusal in sale. So if you are selling your property, right, your neighbour has the right of first refusal. Right? Now, this is a fiqh point. It's one of the places where ethics has a direct correlate in fiqh. Okay? I'm selling my house. The first person I should be offering my house to before I even put it on the market is my neighbour. Yeah? Would you like to buy this house? If they say no, then okay, you can put it on the market. Okay? Now, specific rights. Be kind and considerate towards them. Safeguard the honour of their households and family. Occasionally send gifts to them. Right? Like at Eid. Not exclusively on Eid day, but generally send gifts, give them gifts. Right? If you know or you strongly suspect that they are lacking something, it is your responsibility to see to their need if you are able to do so. Yeah.
What do you do if your neighbour harm you? If they're
So, you have a right to not be harmed by your neighbours.
I know, but say if they
Harmed in what way?
Like harassing, or like making noise, or like making copies.
Call the police. Call the police. You have a right to not be harmed by your neighbours. Now remember, if you choose to bear with a harm, you need to be careful that it's not affecting you inside, which is quite difficult for most of us actually. We tend to take things in and keep them inside. It twists inside, and it starts to poison us, and we start to become resentful, and all under the guise of sabr, mind you. So underneath you got like a cover of sabr on top, a sabr cover. Underneath that, you're a seething cauldron of resentment and frustration and hatred and anger and all sorts of stuff. Okay? Sabr is the pot's off. Not that it's boiling, but you put a cover on top of it. Okay? Most of us find that quite difficult. We need to learn how to do it. Because it actually comes from a relationship with God. When you have a strong relationship with Allah, that's when you can truly be a person of sabr. That's why Allah says, Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. God is with the people of sabr. Okay? But you have a right to not be harmed by your neighbour. And if you are being harmed by your neighbour, you are perfectly within your rights to do something about it within the law. Yeah? You don't have to be nice to them, but at least don't harm them back. Yeah? At least don't harm them back. Alright? So, you had a question? Yeah. I'm finished.
And on your previous slide, your neighbours closer to you further, is that the same as priority?
Yes, the priority works like that as well. So the people that have the most rights over you are the people in your household, then the people immediately around, then the people of your neighbourhood, then the people of the town, then the people of the country. So as an example of a right that the people of this country have over you. Simple example, that you pay your national insurance. That's a right that is people of the country, because the reason that all of us have free healthcare and free schooling is, specifically free healthcare, is because sufficient numbers of people in this country pay their national insurance. That's what funds the health service. If people stopped doing that, at some point healthcare will become private. Okay? So paying your national insurance is a religious obligation because it is part of the rights of your neighbour over you. Yeah? It's part of the rights of your neighbour over you. Which neighbours? Everyone in this country. Alright? These sorts of things. Alright? They're doing this very interesting thing now, like with council tax and stuff. They'll actually show you where the money is spent. So you know that you paid this much council tax, and this much has gone towards, the garbage collection, and this much goes towards this, and this much goes towards that, and this much goes here, and this much goes there. Very interesting to look at it to see where your money is actually going. Yeah, or to get a rough idea anyway. Okay, so. There's a lovely story here, which is the story of Imam al-Haddad. Imam al-Haddad was a 12th century Sufi master and scholar from Yemen, from the Ahl-Bayt. Very great spiritual master and wali. And one of the things that he was very well known for, this part of Yemen, extremely poor. Yemen has always been a very, very poor place. What he was known for is that at Maghrib time, when he walked from the masjid to his house, back from the masjid to his house, he would look to see if smoke was rising from the chimneys of people. And if he found a house where there was no smoke rising from the chimney, what does it mean? No, there's no food. There's no cooking being done. And what he would then do is he would take his own food for that day, the food he had set aside for that day, and he would take it to that person's house and give it as a gift to them. And he would go hungry. He would go hungry because he himself was very poor. And it reached such a point that his neighbours, when they figured out what he was doing, they would be so embarrassed that even if they had no food, they would set a fire in their fireplaces so that he would see smoke rising and think, oh, there's food there. They've got food. You know? until one day he is going home and there's a little boy playing on the street. You know, he's a little boy playing on the street, and he's from this house and there's this nice, you know, cooking, there's a cooking fire going and so forth. And he asked this young boy, he says, "Oh, Assalamu alaikum, alaikum salam, how are you? Alhamdulillah, Hazrat, I'm okay." You know, whatever, Hazrat, you know, I'm okay. He says, "Oh, so what's mommy cooking today?" And the little boy says, "Nothing." He says, "What do you mean nothing?" He says, "No, Mummy, there's no food, you don't have any food." He said, "But there's smoke coming from your house." He said, "No, Mummy always puts a fire in the house at Maghrib time. But all she does is she boils a pot of water. There's just a pot, but we've got no food." Imam al-Haddad is besides himself. He's horrified. He goes to these people and says, "How can you do this to me? How can you deceive me like this? How am I going to answer to Allah on the Day of Judgment if I had food and you went hungry?" And he was genuinely distressed. He took an oath from the people that they will not do this in future. This is the type of thing that makes you a wali. This is the type of thing that makes you a wali. Genuine care and concern and compassion for people. Yeah? Going out of your way to ensure that people are looked after. Alright? Now, again, it's a little bit different now. I mean, I say it's different, but I suppose it depends where you are. You were talking about Muslim, you talk about Little Mogadishu and Little Mirpur. It shouldn't even be called Little Mirpur. It should be called Greater Mirpur now, I think, really, to be honest, you know. But you know, there's this sense. Oh, battery's gone. If you can, thank you so much. Don't worry. There's only 10 minutes until Maghrib anyway, so don't worry about it. Leave it. Just do it for tomorrow. Do it for next week. But yeah, you don't have to worry about it now. I'm sure you can all hear me still. So in some ways, there is retained a sense of community, in the sense that your neighborhood, there's a lot of people maybe that you will know. Maybe because they're family members, you know, or they're, you know, from your village, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. Okay? And that's a good thing, provided it's not restricted to those people. Provided it's not restricted to those people. Yeah? That goodness that we show towards the people who live around us shouldn't just be on the basis of family, and shouldn't just be on the basis of, you know, of some historical relationship from back home or whatever it happens to be. It should be about the people in your neighborhood. Okay? There are places, you know, university towns or places like London or what have you, the population is very mobile. It's a lot more difficult to form lasting relationships, because the idea of a neighborhood for most of human history is that these are the people who you would spend your life with. Okay? For us, I'm living here in Wolverhampton for 4 years, 5 years. Before that we were living in Walsall for 10 years. Before that we were in South Africa. Before I was in South Africa I was in Manchester. Before I was in Manchester I was in London. I don't still have contact with people that I knew when I was 6. But for many of you even, you will have that. You make these very strong bonds. And that's important. That community spirit is a very important thing. Because it helps to ground us. It also helps to restrain us. Because there's always some Auntie G looking out of their window. Yeah? So I remember, you know, I went to South Africa, and I lived, you know, we lived just basically myself, my parents, my brother. That was pretty much it. We had neighbors and stuff, but, you know, no other family, pretty much. My auntie was in London, that was about it. And I go to South Africa, 16-year-old, I go to South Africa. Yeah? I'm walking down the street and people are coming saying, "Oh, assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum." Yeah? I said, "Oh, you are Dr. Abed's son, right?" I said, "Yeah." And like, "Oh, you know your grandmother. So your grandmother and my grandfather lived across the street from each other back in the day in wherever it was. Yeah? So we're like family. You know, or this before I would meet, oh my God, my grandfather's cousins, you know, sister-in-law's, you know, nephew. What? I can't even measure that." And I went to my dad, I said, "Hey, I can't get away with anything here, man. There's always some relative. Everywhere I go, there's some relative. My dad said, yeah, good. Right? So it has that effect as well. So it's important that we maintain these strong communities. Okay? So avoid causing trouble. Avoid quarreling about petty things. I'll tell you one more story. And this is, again, I apologize if you've heard this story before, but it's one of my stories. My patented stories. And it's about when a friend of mine, I was 16, just before we left for South Africa. A friend and I, we went camping. It was like the final hurrah before I went off to South Africa. Okay? So first night, and we were very good friends. I mean, best friends, right? I think I've told you about this before. I mean, I became an imam and he became a pastor. So he's, you know, he's a white guy. His name was Ben, and he's now a pastor. Occasionally I stalk him on Facebook, and he's doing his thing. He's a Christian minister. You know, it's fascinating how our lives have taken us down this kind of parallel pathways. Anyhow, we go camping. At that time, of course, he wasn't religious, and I wasn't particularly religious. You know, and so we go camping. And the first night, we're getting ready for bed. We go to the tent. It's a 2-man tent, which means there's only space for one person. That's how you measure tents, right? Add minus one person from however many it says. If it says it's a 2-man tent, there's only space for one person in that tent. If it says it's a 3-man tent, there's space for 2. That's how camping works. All right? We didn't know that. By the end of that night, the next morning, we hated each other. We hated each other. Because every time I turned around, I elbowed him in the ribs. And every time he turned around, he punched me in the face. All right? Why? Because we're so close. The closer you are, the more you can inadvertently harm someone. And so the more precaution you have to have about how you deal, how you not just deal with them, but how you live your life and how they may be affected by the spillover. As an example, a very pertinent example. We had zikr here last week, as we always do. But Isha time is early now. And when Isha was going on downstairs, we were still nicely making zikr upstairs. And some of the musallis complained. What's this bloody party going on upstairs while namaz is taking place downstairs? I didn't realize the sound traveled so far. I was mortified when I heard. Alright? But now I need to take that into consideration. I need to consider when the prayer times are. And to make sure that the worship that is being conducted upstairs does not inadvertently affect the worship that is being carried on downstairs. This is taking into consideration the rights of your neighbor. Okay? So it's something that we all need to do. We've spoken about the other types of neighbor, your colleagues, your travel companions, and so forth. You know, a simple example. So Sayyidina Umar famously, he was talking. He said to someone, he wanted a character witness for a particular person who had come to him for something. He says, does anyone know this person can vouch for them? So that someone says, yes, yeah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I know this person. Sayyidina Umar says, have you lived with him? He says, no. Have you traveled with him? No. Have you done business with him? No. Then you don't know him. Then you don't know him. Sit down. Okay? Travel brings out things. One thing I remember about my sheikh is that, and I've tried to do myself, is that when he traveled, this is for umrah, for ziyarah, for things like this, he was always really tense. And he was tense until everyone was settled. When he knew that everyone was on the plane, you could just see him relaxing. When he knew that everyone was in their hotel rooms nicely, they were comfortable in the hotel rooms, you could just see he relaxed. And this is my sheikh as a 70-year-old. As a 70-year-old. We should be worried about him, but he's worried about us. Yeah? And this is something that I try to do as well when we go on trips. I try to make sure. You know, make sure I'm the first person to get up and the last person to go to sleep. Yeah, make sure I'm wandering around, making sure, is everyone okay, everyone okay, everyone okay? Little bit. But this is the rights of your traveling companions. Right? At least, remember, principle, don't harm. Right? And bring benefit. If you can bring benefit, great. If you can't bring benefit, don't harm. don't harm. But at the same time, you reserve the right to protect yourself from being harmed by them. You don't have to take injustice. Okay? You have, the authorities are there, you go through the authorities. Okay? So, colleagues, you know, those who pray alongside you and so forth, again, these are rights. So what many of us will find, you know, is, for example, a colleague is off sick, or he's not feeling well that day, and he says, but I got to finish this work. Say, oh, you leave it, I'll do it. I'll sort it out, you go home. That's looking after the rights of your neighbor. It's a little thing. You're looking after the rights of your neighbor. Okay? You see someone's in a bit of difficulty, you help them out. Alright? Don't make their, at least don't make their lives difficult. Alright? As someone said to me once, when you're on the plane, don't take both armrests. Take one armrest. Then your neighbor can take the other armrest, and that person, his neighbor, can take the other armrest. Everyone's got one armrest. But you sit like this on the plane, no, everyone else has to go like this, no. Alright? This is the rights of the neighbor. It's little things. But little things, when they are conjoined with lofty intentions, become great in the eyes of Allah. They are no longer small. Okay? Right? And one of the surahs that you read, most of you will read every day, every second day in prayer. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one who denies the hellfire? فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ. He is the one who rebukes the orphan. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. And does not encourage the feeding of the poor. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. So woe to those who pray. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. But are neglectful about their prayers. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. Those who love to be seen doing good things. وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. But refuse to give small kindnesses. They want to be seen doing the big things, but the little things? No one's going to give me shabash for that little thing. No, Baba, Allah will give you shabash. And no one else can give you shabash. No one is capable of giving you shabash. All people are capable of doing is inflating your ego. Yeah, or at best, encouraging you to do a bit more. Right? But no one can give you shabash except for God. Yeah? But what matters to God is not the size of the action, but the loftiness of the intention. And this comes out, and this is why there's such an emphasis on neighbors. Okay? We leave it there, inshallah, for today. It's Maghrib time now. Brothers, for those of you who wish to purchase the t-shirts and stuff we've got, inshallah, be here after namaz, inshallah. You can come back after namaz. But class is now over, so we'll finish there for today. Tomorrow there is a class. The week after that, the week of the 13th. I know why adhan is not being given.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
Is this adhan?
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
آتي سيدنا محمد الوسيلة الفضيلة ودرجة الرفيعة وبعث المقام محمد الذي وعده وارزقنا شفاعة يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. سمعنا وأطعنا وغفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Inshallah, 2 weeks time there's no class. That's the weekend of the 14th. There's no class. Okay? But we'll see you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله